Before the Rings of Power, there were the Silmarils. Before Sauron, there was his master Morgoth. Before Aragorn and Arwen, there was Beren and Luthien. Join us as we explore Tolkien and all the ages of Middle-earth with your hosts from theonering.com, Jonathan Watson and Michael Grumbine.
Well, guys, it's a new day here at Exploring Tolkien. As you can tell, there are only two of us, and that's okay. Dan will be back. He's taking hiatus for a little while. Two, if you're on YouTube watching us, look at that new background. Isn't that nice? It's light. It's snowy. I don't know. Take a look. It's one of those scenes from Lord of the Rings.
It's actually eminently appropriate for our new series.
That's right. It's a picture of when the Frodo drops the ring on Caradhras right before Boromir picks it up, with a little bit of AI done to like get rid of the people in it and add some more background scene, but it looks pretty good. But this is a change. We're still going to be doing the podcast as normal, even though now, as you know, because you've read the title of this in your podcast or you've seen this on YouTube, we are going through every film change in The Lord of the Rings. Every single one that's worthwhile talking about.
Oh boy.
So as we start this complete list of film changes, finding every film change in the Lord of the Rings films by Peter Jackson, I want to talk about a little bit first about why we're doing this. And it kind of goes back to when long ago, before I met you, Michael, I was working on theonering.com with a few other guys, and we were known as a purist site. We were known as the site that was always questioning the decisions that Peter Jackson was making in the films. New Line still was open to working with us and talking with us and getting us involved and things like that. And most of the discussions were on our message boards. And so, if you remember what a message board is, it's not like Twitter or anything. You actually would have to have like sort of long form conversations with people. It was kind of fun. And so that, in fact, little tip, that forum is still online. If you go to forums.theonering.com, it's completely just read only. You can't do anything with it. But the 3 million posts are still there. The 3 million purist posts, you can go back to, I think it's May or April of 2020, 2000, 23 years ago, to see what people were talking about when they first saw the picture of the Balrog, things like that. And I think it's still like the largest Tolkien message boards on the internet with 3.2 million posts or something like that.
Wow.
And so one of the people who was on that forums was a guy named he called himself Calgon the Black. He helped out with the site, and he decided to start the complete list of film changes. And most of this is really due to his dedication to making sure that everything was listed in there. And it's been updated and changed over the years, but he was really the firing gun that got us launched into doing that. And so now we feel like, after seeing the Rings of Power, and as we're trying to do that right there. You don't see I'm wearing my Make Tolkien Great Again hat, which doesn't fit over my headphones, but can I do this? I don't know. Anyway, Make Tolkien Great Again, right? We see so much that isn't doing this, right? That there are people who say they like Tolkien, but are completely okay with any change that they make to the author's works. We've seen the Rings of Power, which are just, they're going off the deep end with their decisions and characterizations and their writing style. It's bad. So I think it's worthwhile to go through and say, like, okay, by going through every change in Peter Jackson's Lord of the Rings, we can look at what worked for us, obviously, what didn't work. We can get your feedback. You can tell us what are the things that we missed when going through the Lord of the Rings, going through all these film changes. And as you can see, if I were to let's see, where's this? So right here. So you can go ahead and submit a change for us. So if we missed something, as we're going through all these changes, if we missed something, go to theonering.com/changes and let us know what we missed. We'll store that in the database. We'll get an email. We'll make sure we throw it into the list, and we'll go through it. I mean, we'll go through this chronologically, but if we miss something obvious, let us know, and we'll go back and do it again. There's no harm in actually and saying like, oh, I'm sorry, we missed that part in the Lord of the Rings. We can't go back those 3 minutes in the film.
We should probably mention that we do reserve the right, as you said in the beginning, it's all the ones worth talking about. There are probably thousands of changes if you get down to the brass tacks, changes here and there, and that are about details that we don't find to be important enough for the sake of storytelling. See, that's the lens that I look at this through. Is Tolkien is telling a story, and he's a master storyteller, and Jackson was trying to tell a story cinematically. And so the question is, the changes that were made, do they serve that end? That's the larger question. Do they serve the end of excellent storytelling?
Yep. So go to the.com/changes, and we'll make sure that. Well, I'll run it by Michael to make sure that he picks the ones that serve the storytelling changes.
Yeah, and there'll be some details that we cover just because we like them. So, for example, there's one about Legolas, spoiler alert, and his boots versus shoes. And people may say like that doesn't serve the story, but it's an inside joke with Jonathan and I. And Jonathan's great love of Legolas's his feet and his ability to defy physics with them. So we keep some details in, but by and large, we're not trying to cover every single detail, but we are trying to cover a vast number of changes that were made and what we think about them.
Yep. And so we're going to jump into that. We're going to do we're going to release 2 to 3 per week, and maybe 4, maybe 1. It all depends how important they are and how much time we've got. Some of them I think are going to be completely worth talking about in the longer form. And we're still doing the podcast. So the full long form podcast with those 3 items will actually come out still every Tuesday morning. We're back on schedule. So you can go to theonering.com or exploringtolkien.com to get the podcast, or just look up Exploring Tolkien in any of your podcast apps and you can get it. Or you can be like one of our great members at theonering.com/member who get the extended podcast. And you can do that by just going to theonering.com/member. It's $4 a month. The first month is free, so you can check out if you like it or not. And we appreciate all of you who are supporting us. We're getting, a few supporters every month, and it creeps up and up and up. And we're really thankful that it keeps us going and it pays the bills and allows us to do these really, fun not off the cuff. Boy, this took a while. This is not off the cuff at all. But these fun things that allow us to really dive deep into the Lord of the Rings. And I think actually, Michael, I'm really appreciative that we did both the Silmarillion and on fairy stories first, because I think it'll give us a lot of insight into maybe the decisions that Peter Jackson made and why we think he should have made them differently.
Right. I've been thinking a lot about on fairy stories when I've been paying attention to these changes, because of course, a lot of the changes, and we may end up sounding somewhat like a broken record, but there will be times when I repeat myself when I say, look, here's another example of where when you're the director, you don't get what Tolkien is trying to do here. In fact, one of our first three short ones, I do in fact say exactly that. So Tolkien's underlying reasons are important, but you don't know that unless you've really imbibed on fairy stories and some of his other stuff.
Right. Yeah, for sure. Well, I think with that, I think it might be time to jump into our very first take on every film change in The Lord of the Rings. And that's going to be going to the point that it's an adaptation.
It began with the forging of the great rings. 9 rings were gifted to the race of men who, above all else, desire power. Sauron forged in secret a master ring. One by one, the free lands of Middle-earth fell to the power of the ring.
All right, so we are talking about the point that this is an adaptation, that The Lord of the Rings, the adaptation that Peter Jackson made, kind of brings up the point to me, at least, that is any adaptation of a book to film ever good? How many have there really been? And so what happens is you have a great book, a great author like J.R. Tolkien, who has spent his entire life, everything leads up to this. And then you have a director who, sadly now for a lot of Tolkien's works, has been handpicked by some studio executive and isn't a passion project like Peter Jackson's was. But even then, Peter Jackson hadn't spent his life about Middle-earth. And so his insight into creating something that is as deep and as powerful as Tolkien's own story in the written word is just going to be lackluster. So that's my initial take on the adaptations. I was negative from the get-go. I wasn't happy that they were making changes and they were modifying the characters that I knew and the places that I saw in my own head. But that was my first thought of this. There's a problem with adaptations.
I look at this in 2 ways. One is, if you're going to make a movie out of a book, it's going to be an adaptation. There simply is no way to not to put the book wholesale in. You can't do thoughts in characters' heads. You can't do. I mean, you can sometimes in some ways, but really, for the most part, you're not going to be able to convey everything that the book conveys.
Right.
You're going to have to adapt. So I look at this in two lights. The first is from the perspective of, and I think, was it good? Was it as good as the books? Never will be. I agree with your point that there are few to zero movie adaptations that are as good as a good book.
Mm-hmm.
However, the real question is, was it good for a movie adaptation? And that's the way I entered into it. I never entered into it trying to compare it to the books, except in terms of its plot lines and its overall in the intent of the storytelling arc. So I'm a little more forgiving about the fact that it's an adaptation.
Yeah.
I don't see how it could not be. One of the things we do need to address, however, is the Christopher Tolkien quote about this, where he says the commercialization has reduced the aesthetic and philosophic impact of the creation to nothing. A little extreme, but they eviscerated the books by making it an action movie for young people aged 15 to 25. So I see two general criticisms there by Christopher, and one is the reduction of the aesthetic and philosophic impact of Middle-earth on screen. So reducing the aesthetic and the philosophy, and two, turning into a spectacle, essentially, an action, in his opinion, an action movie for 15 to 25-year-olds.
Well, I think that brings up the way we're going to go about doing this, which is going over 3 questions each week. And you're much more gracious about adaptations than I am. I'm just unable to emotionally separate myself as well as a lot of people are. And I accept that.
That's fair.
But the first question we're going to deal with is it lore friendly? Meaning, is the simple fact that it's an adaptation, is it a lore friendly change? I know this is going to be a lot more easy to answer when we're very specific about the changes, but in this general one,
right,
that's the question that we're dealing with. So is it lore friendly? I am, in our answer here, this is just a yes/no question.
Right. We're very black and white on our two of our questions, and then the third one we allow ourselves a scale.
Yeah. So is it lore friendly? That's a no for me.
I agree. It is not lore friendly.
Okay.
And the reason it's not lore friendly is because by definition, when you adapt a book, you are changing the lore. So it's just by its very nature, it's necessarily not lore friendly.
Yeah. And I will tell you, like when they announced Lord of the Rings in 98, late 98, early 99, I was excited, but man, I was scared too. It was a very difficult time for me as a fan of Tolkien because I really wanted it to be something great.
Right.
And then I was very disappointed when I saw the films because it wasn't the characters that I knew and that I saw. So, okay. So that's our first question. Is it lore friendly? Our next question then, is the change necessary for cinema? Again, this is a lot simpler when it's not a super broad ranging question, like it's an adaptation or does an adaptation work? So is the change necessary? Michael, you can go first on this one.
I say, given the reasons that I said before, it is necessary for cinema. You do need to adapt a book in order to put it on screen.
Yeah. I agree. You have to adapt it. There are very few books or anything that's adapted that doesn't have any change, right? You have to make changes. And in some, like Lord of the Rings, they make them shorter. In some, like The Hobbit, they make them incredibly long.
Well, yeah, I sadly, I am actually going to reference the Hobbit movies a few times during this because there's some surprising examples. But yes, we're not going to cover the Hobbit movies because the Hobbit movies are a travesty.
If we do,
as a whole,
like we said, it'll be what did they get right, and that list will be a lot shorter than what they
it'll be super short.
Changed.
Yep.
Yeah. All right. And so the last question is how much do we like the changes? Now, I mean, maybe this is putting the cart before the horse in that, like, we're kind of like taking the whole adaptation and saying, like, how much do we like the films, I guess, in a way? Or how much do we like that they made an adaptation is perhaps the better way of putting it.
I think that's better. I don't think like a judgment. I guess we can come up with a judgment of the whole films. That would be weird because I actually have different numbers for different of the films. But let's avoid that one and just go with what you said, which was how much do we like the fact that they adapted? Is that your question?
Yeah. I think on a scale of 1 to 5, no 0. Michael and I had this discussion. There's no zeros on this scale, so don't go after us if we don't give anything a 0. We're starting with 1. 1 is the worst, okay? Just putting that out there, clarify for anybody who's binging this from the get-go, like 6 years from now. I'm going to split the difference. I'm just going to say a 3, because there were things that I liked. There were things that I liked, and there were things that I couldn't stand. So I don't know. I'm going to split the difference. If it was right after I saw the Fellowship of the Ring, I would have given it a 1, or really would have.
Interesting.
Time
so
has changed.
The years have softened your opinion.
Yeah.
Okay. Because I'm not allowed to use half points, I'm going to go with a 4. I do. I like the fact that they made the adaptation, because I think that was the only thing they could do. I do like the fact, because of how it was done, because it was I believe, a well-intentioned and somewhat well carried out. In fact, in some places, largely well carried out adaptation of the books. I'm gonna have plenty to complain about, but I think overall, I'm more happy than I am not that this was that Lord of the Rings was adapted by Peter Jackson. Now, if we had this number for the Ralph Bakshi, for example, or others, that Peter Jackson's attempt at The Hobbit or Rings of Power, the number would be much less. But I'm favorable towards the adaptation. So there you go.
That's like getting a B. It's like 80%. I'm down to 60. I'm on the verge of an F for this, I guess. Yeah. Well, I mean, I think all in all, looking back, knowing what we get with a lot of adaptations, that's probably softened my stance a lot too, because a lot of the adaptations you get now, because they're so, as I mentioned earlier, they're such a corporate exercise, they are just not up to par, up to any sort of, there's no fire under anybody to create these here other than the almighty dollar, it seems like. And they pay a ton to get it, and then they don't pay enough to get somebody who really, really wants to do it, or they don't take the time to find somebody. Or maybe there's just no finding anybody at all. So anyway, adaptations, they're going down the tubes these days. I don't hold much hope out for most of these adaptations anymore. I'm looking more forward to new stories that hopefully
I like that
people are writing.
And just so our listeners understand the 5-point scale, from my perspective, the way I'm looking at the 5-point scale is very simple. It's not a letter grade, because then there would be 1 or 2 would both be Fs.
I know.
So it would be, for me, if I love the change, if I think it's fantastic, I'll give it a 5. If I think it's good or acceptable, I'll give it a 4. If I'm ambivalent, I'll give it a 3. If I dislike it, a 2. And if I despise it and I believe it's an abhorrence, then I will give it a 1. So that's that's my scale.
I would concur. All right. So we both agree that it's not lore friendly, and we both agree that it's necessary, which is an interesting thing.
Well, and very, very specific to this particular change, because this is the overarching, the making of the movie.
Yeah. All right. Well, if you have a different thought about this and you're watching on YouTube, give us a comment below. Let us know what you think about this. Is there a change that you would make to our scale here?
Follow me. Mary.
Their pace is quickened. Come on, Ghibli.
So that little montage is about 2 minutes condensed down of the beginning of The Two Towers, where we see the different stories coming together, intercut together, and this happens in the films. Because if you haven't read the Lord of the Rings books, there are 3 books published, but each book consists of 2 books: book 1, book 2, book 3, book 4, book 5, book 6 in Fellowship, Two Towers, and Return of the King. And other than books 1 and 2, the storylines do not cross in the books. It doesn't go. Chapter 14 is about the chase of Merry and Pippin, and chapter 15 is about Bilbo or Sam and Frodo, and then chapter 16 is back to Theoden. Right? No, it doesn't do that. It's 20 chapters of Frodo and Sam, and then 20 chapters of the rest of the Fellowship. And the film doesn't do that. So let's talk about that. Let's talk about the very first thing. Is that lore friendly? Is it a good idea to change the structure of the film, of the book that Tolkien wrote for the film? Or not even as a good idea, but does it match what Tolkien wanted to in the lore that he has there?
So
weird question.
No, I think it's appropriate. I actually think I'll probably right out the gate here for our first couple of them. I might disagree with you a little bit on this. This is intercutting. My opinion is intercutting is the movie equivalent of interlace, which is in fact, it's so old, it's medieval technique whereby different, like the French Arthurian legends, they would interlace stories of each of the knights looking for the Holy Grail, for example, and they would go jump from knight to knight, and then they wouldn't tell the story all as one. They would go jump back and forth. And I like what you showed us there, because you did your little cuts, and I think that reminded me of when I'm reading Two Towers to my children. You are correct that there's a larger separation between Frodo and Sam and a bunch of chapters of them in one quote unquote book in Tolkien, and then the rest of the Fellowship in another book in Tolkien. That's correct. But if you look at the other Fellowship, it actually does interlace. It jumps between. So the Merry and Pippin being carried by the Uruk-hai you jump between the three Aragorn, Legolas, and Gimli chasing them, and then what happens to Merry and Pippin, so it does do a jumping back and forth. Now it doesn't do it the way a movie does, and that's hence the difference between interlacing, which is a novel version, and intercuts, because the movie like jumps within seconds sometimes of like a scene, what's happening, sometimes minutes. And I just find that to be appropriate to a movie. Like, there's a visual medium, and visual media have different techniques.
But that's really our next question. This question is, does it support Tolkien's lore of the Lord?
Okay. Is it lore friendly to do that? So my answer is going to be yes. And the reason my answer is yes is because I see intercutting as the movie version of interlacing. So if you're going to do Tolkien interlaces, he does it in long cuts. But he even makes references at certain points to what's happening, like with the sunset before the long darkness, when he tells us that there's something happening. This is the point at which the hobbits were here and the rest of the company was there. Yeah. And so I say it is lore friendly to do that.
I mean, unless by doing it they're changing how characters react because they know things differently, and I don't see how it would be really hard to make it not lore friendly unless they're really changing it. But just the sheer act of intercutting the storylines doesn't make it not lore friendly. So I agree with that. It is a yes for me too. All right. So then let's get to the second question. Is the change necessary for cinema? This might be the easiest question we'll have in the entire 200 episode run of every change in Lord of the Rings. I say, well, yeah, it kind of is necessary, because you can't go off and leave somebody. I mean, even Peter Jackson makes this point. You can't go off and leave somebody alone for 30, 40 minutes and you'll just forget about them. And then your timeline is all shifted. And honestly, that is in Lord of the Rings, when you read it, it's one of the harder things to go back. And when you go to Frodo and Sam, and then you go back to Merry and Pippin, like or actually it's where you go from Frodo and Sam to the Fellowship. No. You go from the Fellowship to Frodo and Sam, and you're going back in time.
You're all the way back in time at Parth Galen. And so, it's
the first time I read that, it was a little tough. So I would say that sometimes it's almost necessary for regular books too. I don't think it's necessary. But again, Tolkien wasn't a professional author. He wrote what he wanted to write the way he wanted to write it.
Well, and I remember when it became in vogue in the 80s, I was reading Tom Clancy novels. So you have Patriot Games and Cardinal of the Kremlin and Clear and Present Danger. And I remember him doing essentially jump cuts in books. Like, how dare
you forget Red Storm Rising?
Red Storm Rising is awesome. I love Red Storm Rising. Yeah. World War III, baby. So there's that's gonna get clipped by someone somewhere. It's gonna be terrible. But luckily, I'm not important enough for anyone to clip that. But he was doing that. He was doing a movie, a cinematic version, even in books. So yeah. Yes. Yes. What is
so
T?
Big yes. It's totally yes.
Totally.
Totally yes. It is necessary for cinema. That brings us to our last question: is how much do you like the change? Man, I guess it's. I mean, for me, it's really a 5.
Mhm.
I don't see why. You have to make the change, otherwise you forget about stuff.
Right.
And
I agree. I
yeah,
really like what they did. I feel like it was just
so you're a 5 too.
I am just a continuation of what Tolkien was trying to do himself.
Yeah. Our averages are a little high. I mean, we've only done 2 episodes now, so your average is going to be like 4.5.
Wait till we're our
4.
third week in, and we've got these. We're just setting the bar up a little bit so that we can knock it down.
Oh well, just wait till the next part where we talk about how many poems and songs were cut from the Lord of the Rings.
Baggett? Sure I know a Baggett. He's over there. And my third cousin. But then, steady on.
So you may be wondering why I picked that little scene when we're talking about how many stories and poems were cut from the Lord of the Rings, and is this a good, bad, or generally meh thing? And that's because this scene here of Frodo in the Prancing Pony at Bree, what he actually does is he dances on a table and starts singing the song about the man in the moon and the cow jumped over it and all that sort of stuff. And it's gone. It's completely gone. The Lord of the Rings is missing so many of the stories and poems. That's what we're talking about here. In fact, I believe I looked it up. There were 61 poems and songs, not stories, but 61 poems and songs in the Lord of the Rings, according to, I think it was Wikipedia that I found it. Many of them belong to Tom Bombadil, which was completely cut from the film. But let's talk about that. Let's talk about, like, is it, before we even get into our 3 questions of is it lore friendly, is a change necessary, and how much do we like it? What was your initial reaction when you realized so much of those stories, songs, and poems were cut from the films that Peter Jackson was making?
My initial reaction was I understood why it was, because a lot of the songs and stories, the longer stories are going to have to be, there's going to be something put on the chopping block to turn these books into movies if you're going to do a bunch of movies. So I understood it. Yeah. Doesn't mean I didn't like it. I wouldn't have liked to see them, but I understood it from a cinematic perspective. That was my first reaction. What was yours?
I wish there were more of the original ones in there. I understand why they cut Frodo dancing on a table. It'd be a little awkward. I understand why they cut Tom Bombadil. I think what I miss the most is that there's so little poetry and song for the elves. The elves don't sing it. Bilbo does. Bilbo has some that talks about it, and Aragorn does. But the elves, do they ever have a poem or a song like that in the Lord of the Rings films? I don't think so. And that's a huge loss, in my opinion, because it was more a part of their culture than the humans. I mean, the songs, I guess you could say, are part of the Hobbit culture, but that was missed. That was my initial reaction then too. So that will lead us right into this question of, is cutting all these songs and poems that some people felt needed to be cut and other people missed, like Tom Bombadil, I understand why they cut them. We'll talk about that later. Is it lore friendly, Michael? So far, you are on a 50%, 1 out of 2 on our previous questions.
Oh, are we going to read our score every time? Oh, great. All right. So, is it lore friendly to cut songs and poems out of Tolkien? This is the man who was the professor of Anglo-Saxon literature at Oxford. He built his career on a song/poem in the Anglo-Saxon culture, which is Beowulf and others that are like it. And there's no way you can say it's lore friendly to remove that from Lord of the Rings. No. Negative Batman.
Yeah, no, it's not completely wrong. 100% bad. It's even worse in the Rings of Power. They just completely excise everything. However, in here, I still wish they would have done a few more.
So if you want to hear us say more about this, join our group, subscribe to us, because in the members section, I am going to talk about the odd choice of them putting in a song that they didn't have in the books, which is Mist and Shadow, the Pippin song at Denethor. So
yeah, if you're not a member yet, you can become a member at theoneroom.com/member for $4 a month. You get an extended podcast, not these if you're watching on YouTube in our shorts, in our shorter episodes.
You'll
Not
never
where
know.
I'm wearing shorts right
I'm
now.
not
I'm wearing
standing
shorts,
up.
but
I'm not standing up.
yeah, but become a member, join us there, and you can hear us and what we would have changed, what we would have done differently. We'll get to some questions from some of our members too. So yeah, it's completely not lore friendly, right? Tolkien spent so much time. His very first, he wrote poetry first, anyway. Really, the Lay of Leithian, right? That was where he started, and so to completely excise it is not lore friendly. All right, let's get to our second question: is the change necessary for cinema? Oh, much as I hate to admit it, yeah, I think it's necessary for cinema. You can't have long, like the entire Man in the Moon song on the big screen. You can't have Bilbo reciting what was that in Rivendell? Was it the Elbereth Gilthoniel poem? So yeah, I think it's kind of necessary. Even though maybe in today's day and age, if this were done as a 12-part episode on Apple TV Plus or Netflix, or pick your streaming service, like maybe they'd put it in, and it'd be kind of cool to see them do that. I mean, they put the whole, let's talk about The Hobbit. They put in the whole song of the mountain, the Misty Mountains, right? Far away. They put that in there. They did the whole what is it? Bang the pots and crack the plate. That movie ruined that song for me. The clean the dishes song.
Chip the bottles and crack the
There
plates.
it is. That's it. Chip the bottles. I mean, it was crack the plates. All right, Michael, what do you think? Is the change necessary for cinema?
Chips the bottles and crack the plates. Well, I'm going to quote something that I almost never do, which is I'm going to reference the fact that they actually put in the Misty Mountains song, or at least a shortened version of it, in The Hobbit. I'm going to quote The Hobbit the Hobbit movie in a positive way, because I've always stood by the fact that the first half hour to 40 minutes of The Hobbit was good.
Yes, right.
And that shows you that you can have a song in there, and they can fit a song. So they could have put more songs. They even they did the Mist and Shadow, and we'll talk about that later. But anyway, so I am actually going to disagree with you. I'm going to say it was not necessary, that they could have put in more. Would they have been able to put in all of them? No. But I'm deeply wounded by the lack of song. And so I do not think it was necessary. I understood why they did it.
Maybe,
but I've changed my opinion over time, and I've come to realize that it isn't actually. I don't think it was necessary.
I guess the question is, what does necessary mean?
Mm-hmm.
Does necessary mean watchable? Does it mean accessible? Does it mean you couldn't do it? To me, it means the decision had to be made in order to make the film accessible to people, more accessible.
Well, or another way of the filter that I use for necessary is, if you had represented on film the way it happened in the book, would it have added to the storytelling or contributed to the storytelling, or would it have detracted from it? So if it detracted, then it was necessary to put it on for the cinema. But if you could have added to it and been more lore friendly, then it was not necessary. And they proved it. Jackson proved it with the Misty Mountains song in The Hobbit, that you can put the songs in and have them be like one of the most fun we have is the chanted version. It takes like,
man, you're starting to convince me.
40. No, you can't change your mind. We got to be different on this one. So let's move on.
All right. So that's number 3. Many storms and moons come. By the way, if you haven't yet submitted a change that we missed, just go to theonering.com/changes. And you can submit it there, because I'm sure we missed something. I mean, you can be as specific as you want, and it takes just a second to fill out a form. We don't ask for email. We just say give us your information, and or give us what you think the change is, and we'll throw it in the list. So please go to theonering.com/changes and let us know what we did miss moving forward into this series. All right, so that brings us to our last question that we have to deal with, which is, how much do you like the change? How much do you like that they cut out so many of Tolkien's wonderful little nonsense tales, nonsense poems, his deep Quenya poems, right? How much do we like that change? This is hard. Because if it were poem by poem, it would be a whole lot easier, but to do it as an entire holistic look at, do they cut it? How much do I like it? I'm somewhere between 1 and 2, Michael, but I guess I'll give it a 2 because it's not the abject worst possible thing. I'm going to give it a 2.
Right. So I also will give it a 2 because it is not an abhorrence to me. It is not something where I say this is the opposite of everything Tolkien. It's a great miss. I greatly dislike the fact that they cut out the poems, but it is not completely contrary. There's a difference between cutting out something that's good and completely opposing Tolkien's ideas and reversing them, which deserves a 1 in my mind. So I dislike. So I agree with you on it too.
So that'd be interesting. Let's talk about in the extended podcast for members. If you go to theonering.com/member and become a member, let's talk about what poems, like what would we have wished we'd seen the most? Which poem, like if we could pick 1 or 2 out of the stories, which one would they have picked, or would we have picked? I mean, it's funny. Let's talk. What Peter Jackson tried to do with the Lord of the Rings was they took words from the film and they made them into other songs too, right? Or they put the songs in different people's mouths. So Aragorn sang the Lay of Lathian. Pippin's song, the Edge of Night song that he sang when Denethor was popping cherry tomatoes out of his mouth. That was from Bilbo's walking song in the Fellowship of the Ring near the beginning. May It Be is like one line and then the rest is made up. The drinking song, I believe, is completely fake. Aragorn's coronation song, if I remember right, is just something he says at the end. He doesn't actually sing it. So they tried to put some in, but they didn't put a lot in. What they did is they shifted things and they moved things. So what are your thoughts on that whole shifting and moving of things? Like instead of actually taking what was there, because I think Philippa Boyens had a good time doing that. That was her mojo. That was her MO. She would go through and
to me, it has to be a case by case basis. Like, what are you shifting and why? And looking at each one. In general, I don't like it. I don't like shifting.
Yeah.
I'd rather keep it with Tolkien. I mean, this is going to be the trend. Everyone who listens to this is going to understand. Like, we are generally speaking purists. You're probably more of a purist in one sense than I am. I give a little more grace, perhaps. We'll see by the ratings by the end. But there is a I think there's a difference in what you're shifting and why. There are some shifts that I totally understand and agree with, and others that I didn't. And we're going to cover some of them in the weeks to come.
Yeah. All right. And we're going to cover a little bit more too in our extended podcast. So if you want to get our extended podcast, go to theonering.com/member and become a member. Just like Harrison, Adam, Lynn, and Chuck, who are more than just members. They are sponsors. They give us more above and beyond what we deserve, but we certainly are grateful. So go to theonering.com/member. We'd appreciate it. Then you can get the extended podcast on your phone and your computer and YouTube through Discord, all those wonderful, great places. And if you have a change, again, go to theonering.com/changes and let us know if there is a change for the Lord of the Rings. So thanks all everybody for watching. We'll be back next week with 2 or 3 more of the changes in the Lord of the Rings. But for now, it's off into our extended podcast.
Goodbye, freeloaders.
Did you think it would end this way? Oh, the journey doesn't end here. The grey rain curtain of this episode will be rolled back, and all will turn to silver glass. And then you hear it. Distant sounds like waves on diamond shores. A far greater episode under a swift sunrise.
Far greater. We're setting ourselves up here a lot. So don't judge us too harshly, everybody.
Well, I want to say something. Since this is the first extended podcast, I really like the fact I didn't lay it out in detail, but I love your picture. I think you understood why I said it. Of course, this picture, which I hope makes it in. I have not checked the list. I think it will, but if it doesn't, we're going to make sure it is. Which is the scene which never occurs in the books, which shows Boromir beginning to be drawn to the ring, and in fact, it's one of those interesting things which, when you look. Like before Boromir, it's hard to see Boromir's starting to turn before Lothlorien.
Yeah.
And so in the books, but Jackson chooses to make it explicit Boromir's thought. Now we do, of course, hear Boromir argues for the fact that it could be used as a weapon in the Council of Elrond, and he's quickly shut down by Gandalf and Elrond. But here Jackson chooses to continue that motivation in a very memorable scene, which never occurs in the books. So this is appropriate to our podcast.
This is going back to our first question. This is an appropriate adaptation in a way, because we have to show the character's motivation. That we can't just read it.
Right.
And it's good. He does show us the motivation, which is proper in a film. He doesn't tell us that Boromir doesn't say continually, I want the ring. Frodo, give me the ring. He doesn't say it from the beginning, right? It's a gradual thing. So, all right. So go ahead.
Yep. No, I was,
okay.
that was it. I just wanted to reference the background. I think it's a great job, Jonathan. All right. So we got 3 episodes that we did, quick episodes. And I know
so it's an adaptation. So if there's, I want to ask
you guys didn't believe that we could do a 5 to 10 minute episode. I just want to say
it's about 10 minutes long. It's
about,
great.
7 to 10 minutes, maybe 11 on the last one.
It's just making more work for me to edit this every week. I gotta cut back on my real work and not see my kids as much.
Oh.
All right, so let's talk a little bit about the whole adaptation thing. I want to know if there was one change, and I'm gonna say you can't change Faramir, because that's what we both say. If there's one change,
the low hanging fruit is too low hanging on that one.
One sort of a greater adaptation that was made. What would you change? And I don't even know. I just thought up this question. So, like, is there a great, because we're talking about the bigger things, right? Oh, Frodo. We're going to talk about how Frodo is younger, about Merry and Pippin are kind of the pranksters. We're going to talk about how Gandalf is a little doltish in the beginning, right? These bigger character or other changes like that we see throughout the entire films. Is there anything as an adaptation that you disagree with and that you would have changed back or added in a way?
There's a lot, actually, because I think this question is the overarching question. It's an umbrella, really, under which a lot of these other changes come. So as we go through, so the umbrella itself is a change. That's correct to the book, because it's not the book. But is there one change that I would make to that was made in the adaptation that I would remove besides Faramir? There are a few. I would remove the replacement of Glorfindel by Arwen. I find that to be odious.
Yeah, I agree with that. I agree. Although I think a greater change for me, which was apparent throughout the whole book, was Sauron's great cat eye, which I understand is even the way Tolkien described it, but to make it the burning flame on top and not give Sauron any form at all, which wasn't even their original intention. Aragorn was supposed to fight Sauron at the Black Gate, which also doesn't happen in the books. But
so glad we don't have to review that change.
I think when I saw it, still feels a little bit goofy to me, especially a spotlight Sauron eye when they're in the
it got really goofy with the spotlight eye when it was looking around spotlighting for Frodo.
It's like
and Sam,
it reminds me of
and then Aragorn comes in, and the eye's like whoop, looks the other way. We can go now.
It's like one of those old video games where you had to where you saw the spotlight, like you were you were a robber and you had to avoid the policeman, and in the little video game you saw the head where the flashlights were shining. You had to hide behind the little crate or whatever.
That I agree with that. What's interesting is that interestingly, when I was young, and even as I was reading it when I was much older, I didn't really think of it this way. But when I was young, I did actually think of this giant eye at the tower. I didn't see it as like a spotlight shining its light over the world, but like it was bound by the pillars, by the spires, the way they did it.
Right.
I did see the fiery eye of Sauron as something that was manifested in some way, definitely in the mind of others, but
it just wasn't an Olympic torch on the top of a big mountain.
At Emonhen.
I agree, and
it's just childish.
The way that it was represented, I think, was just
agreed
goofy.
So one thing I wanted to add about this in our extended podcast, this question about the Lord of the Adaptations was about, once again, to return just briefly to Christopher Tolkien's criticism.
Read that again.
And so, well, I have to pull it up. Hold up. But Christopher Tolkien's, but the aspect of his criticism, I'll read it again. It says the commercialization has reduced the aesthetic and philosophical impact of the creation to nothing. I'll stop there. I agree with that part. No, I don't agree with the aesthetic to nothing. The aesthetic is actually, it might be reduced from Tolkien, but not much. They actually do a pretty good job with the aesthetic in the first three movies. The philosophic, reducing that to nothing, again, not to nothing, but I do agree with Christopher Tolkien that a lot of the philosophical implications of what you're reading when you read Tolkien are missing entirely from the movie. So I agree with him there. Then he says they eviscerated the book by making an action movie for young people aged 15 to 25. Well, I have a quibble with Christopher Tolkien on that one because his father's work is an epic. And when you put an epic on screen, now maybe Christopher Tolkien would say you should never put it on screen. Okay, fine. But if you're going to put it on screen, his statement was they reduced it to an action movie to 15. That's actually part of the epic spirit, is that physical confrontation of evil by good, and the action that's in Lord of the Rings is a major part of the epic. There is no true appreciation of Beowulf without the physical fight between Beowulf and Grendel, between the Beowulf and the dragon, between like all the different parts. Like physical action is necessary for an epic, and his father wrote in physical action aplenty. Yeah, is it the entirety? Is his father's epic an action book, novel? No, it is not. Yeah. So I agree with him there. But when you put that on screen, there is a ton of action. You can't tell me that Gandalf's fight with the Balrog is not an action sequence. It totally is.
However,
the battles.
Yeah, they added things. The very first, they had the battle in the prologue, but one of the first battles we see that drove me bananas was Gandalf and Saruman in a wizard's duel using their staves. I was like, oh.
Are we going to cover that?
You don't get it. Yeah, we'll cover that. That's definitely there. Yeah, because that was one of my most hated things in the Fellowship of the Ring when I saw it. I'm like, this is not Gandalf or Saruman. This is not who they are. They don't battle with staffs, and like the negative and positive of the Gandalf staff of Saruman's staff makes Gandalf spin around on his head. I'm like, come on. That's where I think, like, okay, Christopher Tolkien's got a point that, like, this is now you're dumbing it down for an audience. Instead of giving it a gravity, you're giving it just a muscle mass.
Yeah, it's magical kung fu. It's like Crouching Tiger, Hidden Dragon.
That's a good way of putting it. Yeah. Okay, so Intercut Storylines, anything to say about that? I think it was pretty obvious. I don't know. I don't have a whole lot to say other than like it was a little hard to read the first time. I remember reading, going like, "Oh, I'm all the way back now. I'm all the way back to where Frodo
I'm very amiable towards this change.
Agreed.
I mean, technically, it's a change because they're intercutting versus interlacing, which is a larger, but it's basically the same thing.
All right. So then let's.
This is barely a change. Let me put it that way. Barely a change.
Yeah. Agreed. Let's talk then about the changes that are more obvious, and that's all the poems and the stories that are cut. And I've got a couple questions from a couple of our members too, Naya and Fra, by the way, Francesco. Anyway, he goes by Fra, F-R-A. That's not what I say. Anyway, he's the guy who did our intro. So thank you again. So here's let's answer his question first, and I'll read it for you. Since they couldn't fit all the songs in the movies, he writes, it would have been nice if they'd used them for the end credits instead of the modern ones we got, like by Enya, Gollum song by Torini and Annie Lennox, which I think kind of clashed with the atmosphere of the movies and the tone of Tolkien's work. Yeah, I can agree with that a little bit.
Yeah. So I think
that's not the final question. Let me finish before.
Okay.
Sorry. I like interrupting you, so sorry. I'm thinking renditions of the songs with historically appropriate melodies and instrument, not modern arrangements. What do we think about that, and which songs should they have used for each movie's credits? And then this goes a little bit to my next question, which talks about how they actually used Bilbo's song. They put that, I believe, at the end of the special edition, the extended edition. It was over the end credits there at the end too.
Yes.
And what we think about that, and whether it would have met with Tolkien's approbation. So the question is, should they have modernized the songs, or should we have gotten something more timely?
Okay, well, that's a really interesting question. So should you modernize it? If by modernizing you mean changing it to do an Enya thing or do a rockish thing, then of course they shouldn't have. Enya is an interesting one because Enya's work kind of lends itself to that sort of Gaelic effervescent. There's a lot of fairy. There's a lot of fairy in in the mood of Enya's music. I'm going to put it that way. I actually like Enya. My kids like Enya. Certain Enya songs anyway. And so I'm not really, but I don't think it's Tolkien. So do I think that they should have done? Yes, they should have. And they did. And they could have. They could have, because they proved they did it in The Hobbit with the Misty Mountain song, which they should have done the full version. I thought it was like as the end credits scene. That was awesome. Like the dwarf voices are fantastic. And then with the Steward of Gondor song, which was written by Billy Boyd and sung by Billy Boyd, which was an entirely made up song. So it's interesting.
Yeah, but the lyrics aren't. The song was. Lyrics aren't. The lyrics are from Bilbo's walking song. Which is here. I'll get it exactly for you. Right.
I did not realize that.
Yeah, it's I'm bringing up my copy of Lord of the Rings here on my computer so I can find it really fast. It's anyway, it's page 77 if I remember right by my notes here, because I had to look that up too, because I'm like, I didn't think it was real.
Well, while you're looking it up, let me point out that like I like your clip showing the lack of a song in the inn in Bree in the Prancing Pony, because they could have put that in. That's a very Hobbitish song. The Man in the Moon Came Down, which I sing to my kids when I read this, and I sing it in the tune of Hey Diddle Diddle and the Cat and the Fiddle, which is the tune it was supposed to be sung in. It's because you can see from the story that it's Hey Diddle Diddle. So you sing it in that, and it's perfect. There's the troll song when they're on their way to Rivendell with Aragorn, which is the song is.
I forgot about that.
Fox ran out on a chilly night, which Nickel Creek does the best version that I've heard of it. But it's a drinking song from England, and Tolkien, like, that's the way he wrote it. So when I found that out, I started singing that to my kids in the melody of the Fox ran out on the chilly night, and which is cool. It fits perfectly because the song is meant to be that. So you can do those things. They don't actually take up that much time. It'd be like another minute and a half. You could add 4 or 5 of those songs. You would add 5 to 10 minutes. Now, I understand that the eviscerating nature of the final cut symptom in Hollywood, but I love song, and so did Tolkien. And I think that you're removing a core organ in Tolkien's corpus when you remove most of the songs. Now, interestingly, they didn't remove all of them, and I'm glad to hear. I didn't realize that Steward of Gondor was Bilbo's walking song.
Yeah, it's so
Billy Boyd must have written the melody then.
He wrote the melody. Yeah, it's I believe it's right before. Yeah, the elves. They see elves before Sam sees elves, and they're walking and they're humming, and Tolkien writes, they began to hum softly, as hobbits have a way of doing as they walk along, especially when they are drawing near to home at night. With most hobbits, it is a supper song or a bed song. Supper song. But these hobbits hummed it's like us having a dinner song. We have a food song that we sing when we go home because we're hungry. But these hobbits hummed a walking song, though not, of course, without any mention of supper and bed. Bilbo Baggins had made the words to a tune that was as old as the hills and taught it to Frodo as they walked in the lanes of the Water Valley and talked about adventure. And so he writes the whole song, and in the last stanza, the first 4 lines are, home is behind, the world ahead, and there are many paths to tread, through shadows to the edge of night, until the stars are all alight. So yeah, it's awesome. And it's one of those times that Philippa Boyens went in and was like, okay, where can we stick this here? This is a great line that maybe fits somewhere else. And at least she still has a hobbit sing it.
She has a hobbit sing it. I don't know. Well, we'll get to that. I guess maybe it's hopefully it's a change.
Yeah, for sure.
So we'll see what we think of it. But I just on the general point, generally speaking, that's an important fact that they could fit song in when they wanted to, and so
even if it's brief, they still they put it in. They don't you don't
make them sing for a minute, 60 seconds to 90 seconds. The Misty Mountain song is only 90 seconds or so.
You know what? You can imagine though that the reviews of this would be like, "What's up with all the music, guys? Like, why are they singing so much?"
Yes, I can imagine that, and I wouldn't care in the slightest.
You wouldn't care.
No, but they shouldn't if they're trying to adapt Tolkien properly, and that's our whole point here. Is
properly
like
being
how properly are they adapting Tolkien with their movie when they make changes?
Okay. Yes. Right. Well, which we will continue to find out here, and as the Rings of Power hits next year, we can talk about that in even more depth. How well they're adapting things.
Oh, that's going to be fun.
Oh boy. Okay. So Naya's question is specifically about the last song on the extended edition, which is Bilbo's song. Is there a title for that one other than Bilbo's song in Rivendell? But it's very ethereal. It's probably
Are you talking about his Eärendil song?
Is that it? Yes. I'm trying to remember it. I listened to it earlier and I'm like, what are the lyrics again?
I should have listened to it before this. Of course I've heard it before. The extended edition is the only version we play in our house.
It's a chorus. It sounds like a chorus of females. And they're singing it. I honestly haven't listened to the soundtrack in a long time because I've never been a huge fan of it. But I listened to it again, and I think the style of it feels more elven than anything else. I'm not sure what timely instruments would be used there, but it's not Enya ethereal. It's voices ethereal, and I like that a lot. I mean, they have that whenever the elves appear and they're walking to the Grey Havens in the extended edition, there's that small bit of song that they had. I don't know what they're singing there either. I didn't look that up. But they're Frodo and Sam see them, and there's a little bit of that swell of elf-styled song in the background. And I think it's appropriate that they could have, like you say, they could have honed in on it more, although I'll disagree with you. I still think like it would have been really hard to do in today's day and age. Maybe we're just approaching that a little bit more differently.
Yeah.
But I like it. Yeah, it's just called Bilbo Song at the end of the super long 4-disc edition of Return of the King, which you can stream. What is it? It's 53
and
songs.
You should stream. Oof. You should glory in how long it is, because that's closer to what Tolkien would have liked. So that's say right. I.
That's right. All right, guys, we're done. We hit 3 points. We only have about 180 more to go, maybe 200, depending on how many more people submit. We got 10 more submissions today, so
many miles to go before we sleep. But it's kind of fun running through these one at a time.
Yeah. And if you have suggestions about if there's something you want us to do in the middle of all this, say a letter. I thought like it'd be fun to review a letter at some point, or if we want to do
133, letter 133.
Yeah, I wonder how fast do you think we could get through like Smith of Wootton Major or
Smith of Wootton Major, maybe 3 sessions, something
like that. Yeah, we'll have to do that sometime, but we'll do this for a little while and then we'll jump back into some reading, because I can't do only the films. It's gonna hurt my heart.
It's gonna kill him. Jonathan's gonna become more and more haggard, like butter scraped over too much bread.
Well said. That's right. I already feel that way now. With all these lights, I'm sweating a little bit too. All right, too much information. Too much. All right, guys. We'll see you next week. Thanks for listening. We appreciate you.
We love you guys. Those other people we just like, but we love
just tolerate
you.
them.